Hi, in this tutorial I'm going to show you a few of the customizations I use for our package development in Emacs. And so here I'm going to open up my R directory where you can see there's a number of different R packages. I'm going to pull up one called peek-seg-disc, which has some C++ code in the source directory. And this package, you can see there's various different CPP, C++ source code, and H, C++ header files. And you can see that inside of these header files, I've included this, inside of each one of these C++ files, I've included this header that says compile command r command install. And so this is a cool feature of Emacs that lets you set buffer local variables. So when you have these special symbols anywhere in your, I think in the first line, then Emacs is going to interpret this as variables to set. And so here I put it inside of C++ comments so the C++ compiler doesn't see them. But so Emacs will see that I want to set the compile command to r command install inside of this buffer. So if I run the command called compile in Emacs, what it's going to do is it's actually just going to run this command that I have here, r command install. So the compile command is going to default to the r command install, and so if I type enter again, it's going to run that command. And here it says straight @ in program. What is that? So what happened was I had that little editing mistake there, and so it says find this error in default fun piece list log.cpp. Um, so yeah, this is a mistake. Let's run this again. Here we're going to type mx and then upper arrow compile. I'm going to get the compile command. Run r command install. So here, yeah, this is what was supposed to happen. It's running the usual r command install. Nothing to be done for all. But yeah, I mean the cool thing about this is that say that we edit some of this code and we introduce some kind of problem, like, I don't know, talk about some variable that we haven't initialized in our C++ code. Let's try to do our compile again, see what happens, right? So here we get all of the output that we usually get from the r command install process, but here in this buffer we can type tab and we can go to the different error messages, and then at each one of those error messages we can type enter to get us back to that line of code where we saw that error message. So that may not seem like super impressive, but if you have a lot of different weird error messages, like and you don't, and you're developing your C++ code, you want to be able to very quickly, figure out where those error messages came from. So here I'm going to compile it again, and we see that, well, here in our compilation buffer, we have those two errors for those two like funny lines that we just created. And in either one, we can just, either we can use that facility that I just talked about using tab and then enter to go to it, or we could just click on it with the mouse and it's going to take us immediately to the line of C++ code that corresponds to that, where that error was reported by the C++ compiler. So super convenient for developing R packages with C++ code. And yeah, so just a couple of things that you can do to make this facility even easier to use. So instead of putting this compile command only in the header here, actually, there's a whole there's a whole directory full of files that we were just looking at. There's some header files that we might be editing. Do we want to put that R command install header in every single one of those files? I mean, that's not really the most elegant solution. So here, another C++ file, another, identical header. Do we really want to do that for every one of those files? This is what I did for this project because I didn't know about this cool directory variables thing. So I recently wrote a blog post on this subject. So I'm just going to go there so I can show you guys. Emacs local variables. So here I explain, like, usually, you can use this compile command in the first line of your file, and Emacs is going to set that variable. Or what you can do is you can create something called dir-locals.el, and then it's going to apply to all of the files in that directory, and that's exactly what we want to do here. So instead of putting that header in all of those different files, what we can do is we can just look at the source directory, create that thing called .dir-locals.el. We could put that line of code in there, and what that means is basically for all of the files in this directory, set the compile command variable to R command install. All of these parentheses are, basically if you want to set multiple variables, you can put more stuff in here. If you want to have different things for different files, different kinds of files, you can put different stuff over here. But here in this case, nothing fancy. We just want to say use this compile command for all of the stuff in this directory. And so that's a pretty cool customization. So that means that we can actually just delete all of those headers and everything should still work. So let's try that. And yeah, so here let's open up one of those files again. And let's execute the compile command again. And so yeah, that gives us the same output that we saw before. And yeah, so that worked great, right? So yeah, that's gonna work now in all the different files in that directory. Like, so if you're in our header file and then we want to run the compile command, the default compile command is going to give us the R command install ... which is going to be run in this compilation buffer, which is going to be nicely highlighted so we can zoom immediately to those errors, even if they're in a different file. That's pretty cool, right? So after that, the other customizations that I usually use involve, simplifying this compile process. So here usually, without any customizations, you can do Alt X, compile, return, and that'll do the compilation. So, what I usually like to do is customize my Emacs so I can just do all of this with one keystroke. And so here I'm going to show you what I have again in my .emacs file. Let's take a look. Oh yeah, last thing going on before I go on, well, we might want to go back to this. So first let's go to my .files, and here we have my .emacs. And yeah, so what I was trying to explain is that, in my Emacs I have some compile command customizations. So for example, here we have compilation-scroll-output true, compilation-read-command nil. So these are two commands that I usually like. So if we're going back to our .emacs file and we put these guys in, the compilation scroll output, here we can look at the help for that one, Control H V to get help about that variable. And then it explains that non-nil to scroll the compilation buffer window as its output appears. So that's pretty cool. So you're not always stuck at the top of the buffer. So let's just set that one and see what happens. So here um, we're going back to our source code. Here I'm going to redo my compile command. And so you see that you get all the way down to the end of the buffer. So it's scrolling down to the bottom. And it's so you can see that error at the bottom, which may be relevant. And after that, you can use Shift tab to get up to the previous problem, and then again Enter to go to directly to the line of code that caused that problem. So the other customization that I usually like to do is this compilation-read-command nil. So that's Control X, Control E to execute that line of code. Let's see what that actually does. Control H, sorry, not Control HF, Control HV to describe that variable. So it says non-nil means compile, just reads the command to use. Otherwise, Emacs compile just uses the value of compile command. So before it was non-nil, so it's always asking us what compile command we want to use every time, but we don't want to change it every time. So I'm just going to set it to nil, so it's just using that value. So it says, note that changing this to nil may be a security risk because a file might define a malicious compile command as a file local variable and you might not notice. So therefore, compile command is considered unsafe if this variable is nil. So going back to our code, let's see what this means, right? So now opening back up that C++ file, we can do compile again using mx compile, and then it's going to run that command, and it's going to show us the output just as before, but notice now it did not ask us for confirmation of the command, right? So here, using mx compile, here I use up arrow to recall that last command. It's just running the command immediately, just after sending it. Doesn't ask us to confirm that we want to run our command install. So the last customization that I usually do is I usually just assign that to one of my function keys. So I think I have that down here. It's a global setq F9 compile. So let's do that. And so going to my .emacs file again, we have global setq F9 compile. Now if we execute that, that's going to set compile to our F9 key. So now instead of in our buffer typing mx compile every time, we can just go to the F9 key, strike the F9 key, gives us all the compilation, and it gives us one-touch recompilation with this link to all of these different errors that might be happening. So now this last thing that I mentioned previously in the man page for that variable. So I just try to open up that C++ file where there's an error, and so it says the local variables list in that directory contains variables that are risky. Do you want to apply it? Do you type yes to apply the local variables, yes, or no to not? And so here now, because we enabled that option so that it's not asking us for confirmation of that compile command anymore, it has this kind of security thing. So it says, do you want to accept this as your compile command? Because somebody defined this in that local directory as a compile command, and it wants to make sure that you're okay with that. And so here you can type yes if you're okay with that, or sorry, type Y, and that will be fine. But then next time you open up that file, it's going to ask you that again, and eventually it's going to ask you that for all of the different files that you might want to visit, and it gets to be pretty boring pretty quick. So to avoid that issue, there's actually another Emacs configuration that you can do. to avoid that. So let's do that. And that's explained in my blog post again. That's add to list safe local variable values. So if we copy this into our .emacs list, that's telling Emacs that our command install is definitely a safe command to run. So here, if we execute that line of code, our command install is now considered a safe value for compile command. So now if we go into that same project again, and we open up any one of those files, say that one, it's not asking us anymore if we think that it's safe or not, because we declared that it was safe in our .emacs file. So again, if we want to compile this, now all we have to do is hit F9. Usually before compilation, it asks if we want to save all of the active files. That's always a good thing to do. So I'm going to type yes, even though the Emacs file is irrelevant to my compilation. And then here, we can just click on the file name to go straight to that line of code. And again, it's not asking us if it's like safe to use that variable anymore, because we told it that it's safe in the .emacs file. So, and again, since now we have all those configurations in our .emacs file, we all of that will be set up once and for all. So for all future R projects, we'll be able to just use that one-touch compilation. All right, so thanks for listening, and I hope you learned something about developing C++ code in Emacs.